You must understand something most people will never accept. The moment you start chasing attention, you lose value, and the moment you become comfortable in your own silence, your value begins to rise. Being calm, disciplined, and rare is not about acting superior. It is about removing the desperate energy that people can sense from a distance. Desperation repels, while controlled absence attracts. When you are always available, always responding instantly, always trying to please, you unknowingly train people to take you for granted. But when you step back, when your presence becomes limited and intentional, people begin to feel something unfamiliar, the fear of losing access to you. Think about it deeply. People don't fear losing what is always there. They fear losing what is hard to replace. And rarity is built in silence, in discipline, and emotional control. When you stop reacting to everything, when you no longer feel the need to explain yourself, justify your actions, or prove your worth, you shift the power dynamic without saying a single word. This is where calmness becomes your weapon, not weakness, not passivity, but controlled strength, the kind that doesn't need noise to be felt. Discipline is what supports this calm exterior. Without discipline, silence turns into isolation, and absence turns into invisibility. But with discipline, every move you make becomes intentional. You speak less, but when you do, it carries weight. You show up less, but when you do, it matters. You respond slower, but your response feels measured, not emotional. This is how you create psychological impact. People begin to analyze you, think about you, and most importantly, value your presence because it is no longer easily accessible. And then comes the rarest trait of all, emotional independence. When you no longer depend on others for validation, attention, or approval, you become unpredictable in the most powerful way. People cannot control you through praise or manipulation because you are not seeking anything from them. This creates a silent tension. They start wondering, what does this person want? And when they cannot figure that out, they begin to invest more energy into keeping you around. But here is where most people fail. They try to fake this behavior. They pretend to be distant while internally craving attention. That contradiction leaks through micro actions, checking messages constantly, breaking their own boundaries, responding the moment they feel ignored. True rarity is not an act, it is a mindset. You genuinely become comfortable being alone, comfortable not being needed, comfortable walking away. And that is what makes people fear losing you. Not because you threaten them, but because they sense you won't hesitate to leave. You don't need to demand respect when your behavior enforces it naturally. You don't need to ask for attention when your absence creates it. And you don't need to prove your worth when your standards quietly display it. This is the shift from seeking validation to becoming the source of it. The truth is harsh but simple. The less you need people, the more they need you. The less you chase, the more you attract. The more controlled you are, the more unpredictable you become in their eyes. And unpredictability combined with value creates psychological attachment. So start withdrawing from unnecessary noise. Control your reactions, protect your time, build your discipline in silence. Let your presence become something people earn, not something they expect. Because in a world where everyone is loud, available, and predictable, the one who is calm, disciplined, and rare becomes impossible to ignore and even harder to replace. You have been conditioned to believe that value comes from constant visibility, from being seen, heard, and acknowledged at all times. But what you fail to realize is that overexposure kills intrigue, and without intrigue, there is no psychological pull. The second shift you must make if you want people to fear losing access to you is this: you must master controlled absence, not disappearing out of weakness, not withdrawing out of insecurity, but choosing when and where your presence is felt. Because when your presence is predictable, it becomes ignorable. But when it is selective, it becomes powerful. Look around you. The people who are constantly available, constantly talking, constantly trying to stay relevant, what happens to them? They become background noise. Their words lose weight because they are heard too often. Their presence loses value because it is always accessible. Familiarity, when not balanced with absence, breeds indifference. And indifference is the death of influence. Controlled absence is not about playing games. It is about understanding human nature at its core. People are wired to appreciate what they cannot fully have. When something is limited, the mind assigns it more importance. When something is always available, the mind stops noticing it. This is why your silence, when used correctly, becomes louder than your words. This is why your absence, when intentional, creates more impact than your presence ever could. But here is the discipline most people lack. They disappear randomly, emotionally, without purpose. They withdraw because they feel hurt, ignored, or unappreciated. That kind of absence does not create value. It creates confusion. It signals instability, not strength. Controlled absence, on the other hand, is calculated. It is rooted in self-respect. You step back not because you are affected, but because you choose not to overextend your energy where it is not valued. When you begin to operate this way, something interesting happens. People start noticing the space you leave behind. Conversations feel different without you. Your absence creates a subtle void, and that void begins to pull attention towards you. They start to wonder where you are, what you are doing, why you are not as available as before. And in that curiosity, your value begins to rise. This is where most people make a critical mistake. They return too quickly. The moment they sense attention, they rush back in, trying to capitalize on it. And in doing so, they destroy the very effect they created. Timing is everything. You do not return out of impulse. You return with intention. You re-enter when it serves your position, not your emotions. This level of control is rare, and rarity is what creates leverage. Another layer to this is emotional detachment. When you are not constantly present, you also train yourself to become less reactive. You are no longer caught in every conversation, every drama, every unnecessary exchange. You observe more, speak less, and act with precision. This makes you harder to read, and what is hard to read becomes harder to control. People cannot predict your next move, and unpredictability, when combined with calmness, creates a powerful psychological edge. Understand this clearly. You are not removing yourself to make people chase you. You are removing yourself to protect your value. The chasing is a byproduct, not the goal. When your focus shifts from gaining attention to maintaining standards, everything changes. You stop tolerating low-value interactions. You stop explaining yourself unnecessarily. You stop giving your time freely to those who have not earned it. And in this shift, something deeper happens. You begin to respect yourself at a level most people never reach, because discipline is not just about controlling your actions, it is about controlling your access. Who gets your time, your energy, your presence. And once you become selective with these, people have no choice but to become selective with how they treat you. So start reducing unnecessary exposure. Speak with purpose, not out of habit. Show up with intention, not out of obligation. Let your absence create questions, and let your presence answer them with quiet authority. Because when people are no longer certain they can access you whenever they want, they begin to value every moment they do, and that is when your presence transforms from ordinary to irreplaceable. Most people think value is something you declare, something you announce, something you prove through words. But real value is something you demonstrate through standards, standards that most people are too weak to maintain. This is the third shift you must make if you want to become calm, disciplined, and rare. You must develop non-negotiable standards and enforce them without explanation. Because the moment you start explaining your boundaries, you weaken them. The moment you negotiate your standards, you lower your value. Understand this clearly. People do not respect what you say. They respect what you tolerate. If you tolerate disrespect, inconsistency, or low effort, you silently communicate that your presence is easy to access and easy to keep. But when you begin to enforce standards through your actions, not your words, something changes. People start to feel that access to you is conditional, and anything conditional automatically becomes more valuable. But here is where discipline becomes brutal. It is easy to set standards when things are going well. It is easy to say, I will not tolerate this, when you are not emotionally attached. The real test comes when enforcing your standards costs you something: attention, connection, comfort, or familiarity. This is where most people break. They abandon their standards the moment they feel the risk of losing someone. And in that moment, they lose something far more important: their self-respect. You must reach a point where your standards are more important than your emotions, where your self-respect is stronger than your desire to be liked. Because the truth is, people will test you, not always consciously, but consistently. They will push boundaries, delay responses, give minimal effort, and observe how you react. And your reaction will define your value in their eyes. If you react emotionally, if you chase clarity, if you try to correct their behavior through words, you lose leverage. But if you respond through action, by pulling back, by reducing access, by disengaging without drama, you send a message that cannot be argued with, a message that says, this level of behavior does not qualify for my presence. And that message carries far more weight than any explanation ever could. This is why silence becomes your enforcement tool, not passive silence, not avoidance, but intentional withdrawal. You do not argue, you do not complain, you do not seek validation. You simply adjust your behavior. You give less where less is given. You invest where there is alignment, and you remove yourself where there is inconsistency. This level of clarity is rare, and rarity is what creates psychological impact. Another important layer to this is consistency. One strong reaction is not enough. One moment of discipline does not redefine your value. People watch patterns, not isolated actions. If you enforce your standards once and then compromise the next time, you destroy credibility. But when your behavior remains consistent over time, it creates a reputation. And reputation is what makes people think twice before testing you again. You must also understand that not everyone will rise to meet your standards. Some will fall away, some will distance themselves, some will label you as different, cold, or difficult. And this is where your mindset must remain unshaken. Because losing access to people who cannot meet your standards is not a loss. It is a filter. It is the process of removing low-value connections so that your environment aligns with your level. And when this alignment begins to happen, something powerful emerges. The people who remain start to value you differently. They become more intentional, more respectful, more consistent, not because you ask them to, but because they understand that access to you is not guaranteed. It must be maintained. This is how you shift from being available to being selective, from being tolerated to being respected, from being common to being rare. You stop trying to fit into people's expectations and instead create your own framework, one that others must adapt to if they want to stay in your life. So set your standards quietly, enforce them consistently, walk away when they are not met, and never explain what your actions have already made clear. Because in a world where most people compromise their value for comfort, the one who protects their standards becomes someone others cannot afford to lose. Most people misunderstand power. They think it comes from force, from control, from dominating others in obvious ways. But real power, quiet, unshakable power, comes from emotional discipline. This is the fourth transformation you must make. You must learn to master your reactions, because the one who controls their emotions controls the dynamic. Understand this deeply. Your emotional reactions are the easiest way for others to measure your weaknesses. The moment you react impulsively, you reveal what affects you, what triggers you, what controls you. And once that is seen, it can be used. Not always in an aggressive way, but in subtle psychological ways that slowly shift the balance of control away from you. When someone ignores you and you react immediately, you show dependence. When someone disrespects you and you try to defend yourself emotionally, you show insecurity. When someone pulls away and you chase for answers, you show fear of loss. And all of these reactions communicate one thing: you are not in control of yourself. And if you are not in control of yourself, you cannot be in control of anything else. This is why emotional discipline is not just a personal trait. It is a strategic advantage. Because when you remain calm in situations where others expect you to react, you disrupt their expectations, you create uncertainty. And uncertainty is power. People do not know how to manipulate someone who does not respond in predictable ways, but this level of control does not come naturally. It must be built through awareness and practice. You must begin to observe your own patterns. Notice what triggers you. Notice you feel the urge to respond immediately. Notice when your emotions start to take control of your behavior. Because awareness is the first step toward control. Then comes the harder part: restraint. Choosing not to react when every part of you wants to. Choosing silence when you feel the need to explain. Choosing stillness when you feel the urge to chase. This is where discipline is forged. Not in comfort, but in tension. Not in ease, but in resistance. You must train yourself to pause, to create space between what happens and how you respond, because in that space lies your power. A delayed response is always more controlled than an immediate one. It allows you to think, to assess, to choose your actions instead of being driven by emotion. And here is something most people fail to understand. Calmness is not weakness. It is not passivity. It is controlled strength. It is the ability to remain unaffected while fully aware of what is happening. It is the ability to choose your response instead of being forced into one. When you develop this level of control, people begin to feel it. They sense that you are not easily shaken, that you do not react like everyone else. And this creates a shift in how they approach you. They become more careful, more measured, more respectful, not because you demanded it, but because your presence demands it. There is also a deeper layer to this. Emotional discipline protects your focus. Every reaction you give away is energy lost. Every unnecessary argument, every impulsive message, every emotional response drains your mental clarity. And when your clarity is gone, your direction weakens. But when you conserve your energy, when you choose where to respond and where to remain silent, you maintain control over your internal state. And that internal control reflects outward. It sharpens your decisions, strengthens your presence, and elevates your position in every interaction. You must also accept that not every situation requires your reaction. Not every comment deserves your attention. Not every person deserves access to your emotional state. This understanding alone will remove a significant amount of unnecessary chaos from your life. And over time, as you continue to practice this discipline, it becomes part of your identity. You're no longer trying to stay calm, you become someone who is calm. You are no longer resisting reactions, you naturally choose control. And this is where real transformation happens, because the person who cannot be emotionally manipulated becomes difficult to control. And the person who's difficult to control becomes powerful in ways that most people will never fully understand. So learn to pause, learn to observe, learn to respond with intention, not emotion. Because in a world where most people react without thinking, the one who remains in control of themselves controls the outcome. Most people are controlled by something they don't even realize: validation, the need to be seen, to be approved, to be acknowledged. This quiet dependency shapes their behavior in ways that make them predictable, easy to read, and even easier to manipulate. This is the fifth shift you must make if you want to separate yourself completely. You must detach from the need for validation, because the moment you stop needing approval, you become dangerous in the most silent and powerful way. Understand this clearly. When you seek validation, you give others authority over your self-worth. You wait for responses, for reactions, for signs that you are enough. And in that waiting, you lose control, because now your mood, your confidence, your decisions are influenced by something external, something you cannot control. This is why people chase attention. They send messages and wait. They post and check reactions. They speak and look for approval in the faces around them. And without realizing it, they place themselves in a position of dependency, because the one who seeks validation is always at the mercy of the one who gives or withholds it. But the moment you remove this need, everything changes. You stop performing, you stop over-explaining, you stop trying to prove your value, and instead you start operating from a place of internal certainty, a place where your actions are not driven by how they will be perceived, but by what aligns with your standards. This is where real freedom begins, because when you no longer need validation, rejection loses its power, silence loses its meaning, delayed responses no longer create anxiety. You are no longer trying to interpret every action, every word, every shift in behavior. You simply observe and then you decide. But reaching this level is not easy, because the need for validation is deeply rooted. It is built over years through social conditioning, through past experiences, through the constant reinforcement that your value comes from how others respond to you. Breaking this pattern requires awareness and deliberate effort. You must start by questioning your own behavior. Why do you feel the need to explain yourself? Why do you seek reassurance? Why do you feel uncomfortable when someone does not respond the way you expected? These questions will reveal where your dependency lies, and once you see it, you must begin to resist it. Not aggressively, not forcefully, but consciously. When you feel the urge to seek validation, pause. Do nothing. Let the discomfort exist without reacting to it, because that discomfort is not weakness, it is withdrawal. It is the process of breaking a habit. You must learn to validate yourself, not through empty affirmations, but through actions, through discipline, through keeping your word to yourself. Because every time you follow through on what you said you would do, you build internal credibility. And internal credibility is far more powerful than external approval. Another important shift is this: you must become comfortable being misunderstood. Because when you stop explaining yourself, people will create their own interpretations. Some will get it wrong. Some will label you based on limited information. And if you still seek validation, this will disturb you. But if you are truly detached, it will not matter, because your focus is not on how you are perceived, but on how you operate. You understand that perception is unstable, but your standards are not. And that clarity protects your peace. There is also a strategic advantage here. When you do not seek validation, you become unpredictable. People cannot control you through approval or disapproval. They cannot influence your behavior by giving or withdrawing attention. And this removes one of the most common tools of manipulation. Over time, this creates a shift in how others see you, not because you are trying to be seen differently, but because your behavior reflects independence. You are not reacting like everyone else. You are not chasing, not proving, not seeking, and that absence of need creates presence, a quiet, grounded presence that draws attention without asking for it. And this is where you step into a different level of power, because the one who does not need validation cannot be controlled by it. The one who is internally stable does not fluctuate with external reactions, and the one who stands on their own value does not need to convince anyone of it. So stop seeking approval. Stop waiting for validation. Build your value internally, reinforce it through action, and let your presence speak without explanation. Because in a world full of people chasing recognition, the one who needs nothing becomes impossible to ignore. There comes a stage in your evolution where your value is no longer defined by what you show, what you say, or how much you give. It is defined by what you withhold. Most people are trapped in a desperate cycle of proving themselves, constantly displaying their skills, their kindness, their availability, believing that visibility equals worth. But the deeper truth, one that only the rare begin to understand, is that true value is quiet, controlled, and often unseen. When you reach this level, you stop performing for attention and start operating from a position of quiet power. And this is where your presence begins to shift from ordinary to unforgettable. Think about it carefully. What is easily available is rarely respected. What is constantly offered loses its significance. People do not fear losing something they believe they can access anytime. But when your energy, your time, and your presence become selective, when they are no longer handed out freely, a subtle tension begins to form around you. People start to sense that access to you is not guaranteed, that being in your circle is a privilege, not a right. This realization alone elevates your status without you needing to say a single word. This is not about arrogance or playing games. It is about discipline and self-respect at the highest level. You begin to understand that your attention is a currency, and like all valuable currencies, it must be spent wisely. You do not respond instantly to everything. You do not entertain every conversation. You do not chase approval. Instead, you observe, you choose, and you act only when it aligns with your standards. This restraint is what separates you from the masses who react impulsively to every situation. There's a psychological shift that happens when you stop overexposing yourself. People begin to fill in the gaps with their own imagination. Mystery starts to surround you, and mystery, when combined with calm confidence, creates a powerful magnetism. Others start to wonder about you, to analyze your behavior, to seek your validation without you ever asking for theirs. You are no longer competing for attention, you are becoming the source of it. At the same time, this level of control protects your inner world. Not everyone deserves access to your thoughts, your plans, or your vulnerabilities. The more you reveal, the more predictable you become. And predictability is the enemy of influence. When people can easily read you, they feel comfortable. But when they cannot fully figure you out, they remain alert, engaged, and slightly cautious. This subtle tension increases your perceived value in ways that are difficult to measure but impossible to ignore. You must also understand that scarcity is not just about physical presence. It is about emotional availability. You are not always reachable, not always explainable, not always accommodating. This does not make you cold. It makes you disciplined. You are no longer driven by the need to be liked. Instead, you are guided by the need to maintain your standards. And ironically, this is what makes people respect you more. The strongest individuals are those who can walk away, who can remain silent when others expect a reaction, who can hold back when others are rushing to give. This control creates a sense of stability and strength that people naturally gravitate toward. They begin to realize that you are not easily influenced, not easily replaced, and not easily understood. And that realization creates a quiet fear, the fear of losing access to someone who cannot be replicated. As you move forward, remember that your power does not come from how much you display, but from how much you control. You are not here to be everywhere, to please everyone, or to prove your worth to those who cannot recognize it. You are here to build a presence so grounded, so disciplined, and so rare that your absence speaks louder than most people's presence. And when you reach that level, people will not just notice you, they will value you, respect you, and most importantly, they will fear losing you.